Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you to the D4GX 2021 annual conference. We want to thank you for taking out the time this afternoon to join us and wanted to share that we have an exciting afternoon lined up for you with very insightful conversations on how data can be used to empower the most vulnerable. Just a very quick note to everyone joining us. Please use the speaker view format on your devices to enable an optimal experience this afternoon. I also want to introduce Kirtana and Adam, our sign language interpreters, and Ghana, our live artist who will be supporting us through our sessions today. To kickstart this session, I'd like to invite and request Vandana Ramchandani from Bloomberg LP to share some opening remarks with us.
Thank you, Divya. Good afternoon, everyone. As Divya said, thank you for taking the time to be part of this very special occasion as we kick off the Data for Good Exchange India annual conference. I'm Vandana Ramchandani and I lead corporate philanthropy for Bloomberg in Asia. 2021, as we know, has been an extremely challenging year for the whole world and equally, if not more so, for India, amplifying the inequalities in our society and further straining efforts to create equitable growth for the most vulnerable communities. But through the pandemic, it's been very heartening to also see an increased interest among Indian nonprofits, funders, and the government to work towards strengthening the data ecosystem for India's development sector. This, however, highlights a continuing need and opportunity to bring together the best of minds from data, development, and philanthropy to not only share and learn from our collective experience, but also come together as a community to create and support solutions for greater and sustained impact. Data, as many of you may already know, is at the core of all our work at Bloomberg, as is giving back to the communities in which we live and work. We have hence long advocated for using data science to solve societal platforms. And an ethos that shines through the annual Data for Good Exchange conference, which Bloomberg has hosted in the US since 2014. We truly believe that data science can be the key to solving some of society's greatest issues. Each year, key stakeholders, experts, and innovative thinkers come together from both the public and private sector to share insights and new ideas, harnessing modern machine learning, data science methods, and more to improve civic and social outcomes. In this digital era, data informs almost every aspect of modern society, from the products we buy to the ads we see and the food we eat. But beyond the commercial, data.
Vandana, you're on mute.
I'm sorry.
Just the last 10 seconds, yeah.
I don't know what happened. Probably somebody was muting others. Okay. So I don't know where I left off, but in this digital era and age that we live, as I was saying, data informs every aspect of our life in modern society, from the products we buy to the ads that are sent to us through social media or that we see, the food we eat. But beyond the commercial, data can really equally be used as a force for societal good. So when we launched Data for Good Exchange in India with Dasra last year, our endeavor was really to bring to life a year-long vision of fostering collaboration between stakeholders and redefining India's data narrative to place the vulnerable at the center of all database solutions. I know we have ways to go, but today we take great pride as we reflect on how an idea has been transformed into a year of learning and impact with Dasra's leadership and with great partnership from societal platforms and Stanford PACS. And for that, we are most grateful. So I truly want to call upon everybody because I think it is this power of collaboration and collective that is really going to help us move the needle. So to share, we started with 3 guiding objectives. 1, enabling data agency for India's most vulnerable communities. 2, scaling innovations that create transformational change for vulnerable communities by leveraging data. And 3, to bring together innovators, funders, and ecosystem builders to continue growing and developing such innovations and rebuilding India's communities, those especially that suffer most deeply at the hand of any crisis, with inclusive and participatory solutions. So some of you were here with us in January when we launched the D4GX dialogue series and landscape study. And if you haven't had the opportunity to go through those, they are on the D4GX website. So please do take the time out and go through them. We garnered some great insights from these conversations, and they've been really instrumental in co-creating a foundational understanding and building shared goals to enable data empowerment for India's most vulnerable. We also launched the D4GX Challenge, through which we sought to amplify innovations, and during the course of which we've identified organizations using data solutions through a 3-round selection process. This challenge received great response, more than anticipated, honestly, and we've shortlisted 21 innovators who will be highlighted today, along with 3 grant winners. So with that, thank you once again on behalf of Bloomberg, Dasra, and our partners, especially to all our key stakeholders who have been so integral to the success of these initiatives. But this is just the beginning, and we look forward to continuing to work to build upon the learnings of this year in 2022 and beyond. With that, I'll pass it back to Divya to take us through the rest of the agenda. So enjoy the conference.
Thank you so much, Vandana. Really appreciate you setting the context to today's session so well and to the overall initiative as well. We now want to move on to the roundtable conversation on enabling data innovations for data empowerment. I want to invite and introduce Dr. Marcus Rani from Human Edge, who will be moderating the conversation for us. I also want to invite the other speakers who will be joining the conversation today. We have Aniket Diogar from Hakdarshak, Animesh Sharma from Intellicap, Ingrid Srinath from Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy, Ashoka University, Natasha Joshi, Associate Director at Nilekani Philanthropies, Sarah Chamberlain from BBC Media Action. Thank you, and over to you, Marcus.
Thank you very much, Divya. Thanks for having us. Thanks, of course, Vandana, for those opening remarks, and welcome to all the panelists as well. We were just catching up in the room prior to this, and I can tell all of you that this is going to be a really interesting roller coaster of data centricity over the next 30 to 35 minutes. I remind you that if you have any questions, please feel free to put it into the chat window or the Q&A box and specify the panelists that you would like to direct that question to. And we shall be bringing some of the audience questions to the panelists, hopefully at the end of this session as well. All right, I'm going to jump straight into it. And it's a fundamental question because I think data means so many things to so many people, depending upon whom you ask. My question number 1, just to get us all on the same page really, is what exactly does data mean to you? Aniket.
So I think, like I said, data is democratizing information, making it extremely, as we say, massy, and make it in local language so that it is accessible to all.
Okay, all right. Sarah, what about you? What does data mean to you and the stakeholders that you engage with?
Data holds a lot of promise. There are a lot of opportunities to leverage huge government data sets to provide, for example, free health education to millions of women across India, as we have done. However, data is also constrained because in countries like India, there's still a massive gender digital divide, and social norms and SIM change really prevent us from making use of data as we would like. And concerted efforts need to be made to reduce gender biases in this data.
Yeah, and we're gonna dive into that in a little while as well. Natasha, what about you? What does data mean to you? You know, we ask people, it might be how much balance is left on the SIM card. It might be how much time they can stream their favorite Netflix show. It might be access to their medical professional, etc. But in your world, what exactly does data mean?
Sure. I mean, for us, data is the knowledge that helps us drive towards goals a little bit better. So whatever helps us see the intended and unintended consequences of our work is what we understand to be as data.
All right. So if we look at the equitable access challenge, Sarah, and I think we can break this up into two components. As I was reading through the D4GX report, which was published, let's look at the gender bias, so the gender differences that exist in a country like India. There's about a 16 to 17% difference, as per the report, between male and female access to data. What are some of the things, Sarah, that we can do to help bridge that gap and allow for a more equitable access across the genders?
The digital gender gap, I would say, I mean, it depends on what you look at it from, but 75% of adult women in India don't own smartphones. And although 93% of households in India do own phones, only an estimated 56% of women are allowed to use them. So the data that is available to us, chances are that data is male. The majority of SIMs, I'd say like 95% of SIM cards are owned they're in men's names. Men recharge data on women's phones. So the data that is actually accessible to us, there's this huge bias. So how do we go about addressing that? And I think the first move would be to actually recognize that this bias exists and recognize that the tens of millions of mobile numbers, for example, registered against pregnant women and new mothers' names in the maternal and child tracking system and reproductive and child health databases probably belong to men. So we need to recognize that this bias exists really before we can address it. Thank you.
And then, of course, there's the economic differences which exist between people even living in metros, between scheduled versus unscheduled classes, between different hierarchies within society as well. Aniket, to bring you in, given the work you do at Aftershock as well, what are some of the strategies we can employ to manage the data inequity which is occurring between different socioeconomic groups in the country?
So I think the more privileged economic and social groups have different ways of sharing data, or we have different ways of getting data from them because they're more digitally connected. I think where the difference largely comes also is because in the economic and socially marginalized communities, the data access, I mean, they're not digitally that connected. So I think the only way to get that data is just a push method where you are actually collecting data, and that's where I think those biases also come in. So if we can involve them more and more into programs and into more and more digital spaces, that's one way. And I think that's also linked to the economic empowerment in terms of the more opportunities they get. So I think we just need to ensure that when we are designing programs or when we are working on the ground, we are really looking at it more in terms of getting them into the digital ecosystem, not necessarily doing a survey. That is only going to solve a very short-term objective. The long-term objective is, can you get them digitally connected? Because that will mean you can get data consistently of those communities, and then that will be more inclusive because they're using digital means to get economically connected, and that way you're going to be getting more democratic data.
Yeah, and I mean, a country like India, there's a lot of good that's also happening on the data front. We've got 1.25 billion people now who have all their biometrics stored on the Aadhaar system. There are 700 million internet mobile phone users. Half the country is online. Ingrid, what is the price that we are paying for this data in terms of good and bad to the population?
Thank you, Marcus. So I've often summarized our data ecosystem as being fragmented, incoherent, inaccurate, inaccessible, sometimes misleading, and often absent. And we saw during COVID, I think, exactly how immediate the price we pay for this is. So whether you were a funder or an NGO or a government department, or a company trying to make sense of what was going on, or somebody seeking oxygen or medication, the scramble for information took up almost as much effort and time as the actual delivery of aid and services. For civil society in particular, this means a loss of identity, of fuzziness around who is civil society? How many of you are there? What do you do? What's your contribution to the economy or to society? What's the value of that contribution? What's your what percentage of the population do you employ? What's your GDP footprint? And the same for philanthropy. It allows for myth making, or rather it prevents the shattering of myths. So myths of inefficiency, of ineffectiveness, of corruption, there's always this, these random factoids that are pulled out. 3.1 million NGOs, 3.3 million NGOs, without any clarity on how many of those still exist, how many of them are, trade associations. I mean, when something includes everything from the BCCI to CSIP, you know that there's a problem in understanding this. So, and then the data, even where the data exists, is either inaccessible. So for example, the income tax department sits on a treasure trove of data when it comes to philanthropy, but they're unwilling to share it. And so we lose visibility on the sector. And this then affects the sector in that the sector, despite reporting to more authorities than any other sector in the country, is still seen as opaque, unaccountable, non-transparent. And decision-making, of course. I mean, you've got some of the biggest gaps to the development goals anywhere in the world in India. Many of those have been exacerbated by COVID. And it's more critical than ever that we know what resources we have and that we avoid duplication of resource use and we avoid wastage of resources, all of which is going to take better data, more accessible, more coherent data.
Okay. Animesh, you mentioned a very interesting phrase earlier, which was bringing the human touch into data. Can you expand on that, particularly in light of what Ingrid has shared with regard to disparity and the challenges that it creates in our country?
Thanks, Marcus. Yeah, so I think the way I'm looking at data is primarily through how we could use data to design our social interventions in a much better manner. And essentially, data for us is more like something which is powerful, something which can help us take more informed decisions, something which can reduce our chances of failure. So when you look at data from that lens, that what is it that I'm doing to understand my community in a much better manner? Can I provide an ecosystem where the community can come together and express itself in a more comfortable manner without the fear of being judged? Can they share their needs in a more comfortable manner? So essentially, the role of a data individual working in this space is largely to create that ecosystem. And technology can be a lever in this space. But at the same time, I'd want to highlight that while technology becomes like a necessary condition, but it is not a sufficient condition anymore. So just by having technology, we cannot ensure that we create a setup or an ecosystem where the community can come out and share things in a more transparent, in a more comfortable manner. The major challenge that I see in this particular space is that community in general does not know what are we going to do with that data. Essentially, the entire data collection process has typically been showcased in a more extractive manner, that somebody is going to come from big cities and going to extract information from you and is going to do something with it, and you wouldn't know how your data is going to be used. And then the entire issue of data security, privacy. Can we look at data from a more human lens? Can we instead of looking at our community members just as one of the stakeholders or somebody from whom you can get information, can you co-create your solutions with them? Can you involve them in the entire process? Can we look at a system where they could be involved in constructing the narrative? A lot of times we create narrative from quantitative, qualitative data, and the question for us is that who are we creating those narratives for? A lot of times it's for our donors, it's for the government. Are we really involving the community, creating those narratives for them, and also sharing those narratives with them so that it's easy for them to locate where they are in this entire setup? And particularly when we look at the entire data ecosystem, where are they in that entire setup?
All right, thank you for that. And for folks who are joining in, you've signed in for the D4GX annual conference plenary session. We're having a conversation on how we can use data for good and the innovations that we can bring to drive societal change through the power of data. If you've got questions for the panel, please start putting them in to the Q&A box, and we shall be taking that from the audience in the next 15 to 20 minutes. Make sure you address whom you'd like the question targeted towards. I'm gonna bring Natasha on now. There's a famous saying, I think it was Lenin who said it, that there are decades that go by which seem like weeks, and then there are weeks that go by like it seems like decades. And certainly through the pandemic, we've had many of those weeks. A truly digital transformation has occurred around the world as well. How has this affected the data world, the space that we're all engaged in, for good and bad? And what are some of the things that you're most excited about, the change that it's bringing for societal well-being?
So, I want to sort of respond in particular to the prompt around what the pandemic did, especially when it came to relief. Because I think there was a portion where there was immense need on the ground that had to be served. And it was civil society organizations that were most proximate, that were most embedded, that were able to actually push forward the relief functions. So, Marcus, in a sort of counterintuitive way, I'll sort of say that a lot of the pandemic revealed the need to be able to be sort of more proximate, lead a little bit with trust and a little less with data, because when it comes to situations like relief, I think field-based organizations genuinely felt constrained in certain instances because they were not able to supply data and sort of validate their work adequately enough while they were actually doing the work. And I think this is something to think about because the needs, when they are dynamic, we have to think about because data collection is onerous to some extent, and data gathering is an onerous activity. So what is the time for when data is collected? What systems do we put in place such that there is automatable data is collected automatically, but any data that requires human energy, at what point do we stage gate the collection of that data? So I think that's one thing. The other thing that I just wanted to quickly comment on was the resolution of data. I think what we have found in our work now, especially going forward, is you can have data, which is, what they say, good data, bad data. And what I would sort of reframe it not as good or bad, but I call it the resolution of data. Is it low res data? Is it high res data? And what makes data go from low res to high res? And a simple example of that is, you could find out how many rations were distributed. And that's the sort of very basic metric, let's say, in COVID. But then, what was in the ration is also important. Who was it given to? What is the number of families? Which states were distributing what? So a lot of it goes down to the sort of the details, and that increases the resolution of the data, including, like Animesh also said, qualitative data, which plays a huge role in sort of providing the kind of why and how behind a lot of the data that we're seeing. Yeah.
Aniket, if I could bring you in here, because you spoke about two very interesting words, which is vernacular and democratization of data, right? So especially given what's going on now, and India is a fantastic example of this, over 100 languages spoken, so many, thousands of literally tribes around the country, all of which need to have access to basic bits of zeros and ones ultimately. But what is it that we can do to ensure that engagement And what are the effects that data can then lead to in this ideal world if we can address the vernacular and democratization of it?
So I think both in terms of the data, that content that we build, and also the software that we write. If we can look at it in multiple languages, it really goes a long way, both in terms of the quality of data and also the speed of data. I mean, I'll give you our example at Hakdarshak. When we started, we were basically doing Hindi and English. We were digitizing government schemes. Today, we have digitized 7,016 languages. That has just enabled us to go right from Northeast to North, South, East, West. And because locally, just the uptake of that kind, and not just schemes content, we've also redone our entire software in terms of input questionnaires, which really helps, because then you can do that English kind of a thing, which is part English, part local language kind of a model where people can speak. So all these things go a long way. And then that should not just be looked at in terms of problem solving in the short term. It is also, I believe, if organizations have to build solutions, that is one of the fundamentals of building for scale. Just not about having a bigger AWS infrastructure. We were doing 5,000, for example, applications 2 years back. Now we do about 100,000 applications a month, right? And that's that per application, we capture 60, 70 data points. So we are talking about 6 million to 7 million data points capturing. If we did not build in the local language, both in terms of the questionnaire and content, that would not have been possible. So I think as we look at how we are going to capture quality data and how do we, and that can then has to lead into, like I said, content, modules, training, process, because I totally agree that collecting data is really, really difficult piece by piece. And I think we need to figure out ways where we can really kind of, get it from the common pools. And that's where collaboration, that's where sharing of common platforms really makes it really easy. If you're building platforms in the sense where you can share it easily, the data that you've collected, like building on open APIs, building on open platforms, that also goes along.
Okay. In our conversation alone, if you look around the room here, we've got folks from different sectors. We've got private industry, we've got philanthropy, we've got media, we've got academia, we've got social entrepreneurship. So clearly there's a need for a multi-stakeholder approach towards addressing this problem, like so many of the large challenges which exist globally. And something which is common to everything is, of course, the investment cycle. It's bringing the funders, it's bringing the cash into the system to allow for the different tools to be built, the different access to be created, and ultimately the impact to be generated as well. Ingrid, if I may bring you into this, how might we be able to engage with these different stakeholders in a meaningful way that allows for this movement to move forward in a positive direction?
So I think there are two key stakeholders here. One is government and the other is private investment. As far as government is concerned, a lot of what we need to happen with official data doesn't require a great deal of money or a great deal of investment. It's mostly to do with, can we have more standardized definitions? So can charitable purpose, for example, be defined in the same way in all the laws where charitable purpose is an issue? Can there be standardized typologies of what we're calling sort of different thematic areas in which NGOs work? Can we, for example, work around, maybe use the SDG framework to standardize those typologies? Can there be unifying fields? So can they have, for example, the PAN number of every NGO that sits in the Darpan data set. They also have it for the ones in the FCRA data set and the CSR data set. If, for example, they were able to link using PAN number as a linking field, we could start to look at that data in a more 360-degree way. There's just some things that are just trivial little errors, so double counting, missing pieces. There's a fairly short list of things that government needs to do to make the data more coherent and more accessible. There's income tax data, for example. I mean, every taxpayer in this country who claims a charitable deduction is in their data set. We only get access to that as one aggregate number in the budget speech. We don't get to know what's the demographics of those donors or how that's changing over time. As far as the investment side of this is concerned, there's really need to build out an entire ecosystem. So what we don't have, if I can compare this to, let's say a country like the US, we don't have the equivalent of a Candid. Candid, thankfully, worked with us to produce an India portal, but we don't have one organization whose mandate it is to curate data for the sector, and that organization could then be the main interlocutor to work with government, for example, to figure out how those things are done. We'd like to see philanthropy move upstream in terms of going from not just program funding to capacity building, to institution building, but really to building that ecosystem of service providers that provide services to the sector at large, research institutions, academic institutions, data curation institutions, as I said. And we need a real program of capacity building across the sector to understand what data is, how it can be used, what its hazards are, where's the thin line between knowing everything there is to know and becoming the most surveilled society in the world. What are the principles and values we want to apply in terms of whose data it is and how much say they have in how it's used. I mean, right now, I go online and I find reproductive health data for women sitting in open Excel sheets, which is just ludicrous. So I think there's three areas. One is just, rationalizing data that already exists and fixing some of the glitches. Second is investing in an ecosystem that will then allow for thoughtful curation of that data. And the third is capacity building, so that we understand how best data can serve communities rather than the other way around.
And Natasha, from your perspective, Ingrid spoke specifically for what philanthropy can do here. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Ingrid, in particular about philanthropies supporting a lot of practitioner-led research, and which then gets kind of situated and anchored at the level of the organization rather than the evaluator on the outside or the donor on the outside. So is there a way in which we can create a more enabling environment for NGOs to be able to evaluate their own work? And one of the things that we have actually done for one of our portfolios, for instance, is we've done what we call an evaluation for learning, where all of the evaluation that's been done has been done for the purpose of the entire sort of community learning together, us including the partners. And so I think that more such practices would be definitely useful, and it's a direction that we would like to move in. And also, I think creating some amount of convening more conversations around data and impact is also really useful, because it's a question that comes up a lot with organizations. What is your impact? And how we talk about impact, again, in a way that's layered and that it accommodates a lot more than what it currently does, is also a role I think that philanthropy can play.
All right, fantastic. I see questions coming into the chat window already, and I encourage the speakers to have a look and just scroll through. And if there's some questions directed to you, please feel free to respond to those folks in real time, as I see Sarah has done as well. So Sarah, I'm gonna bring you in and ask you a question. Specifically, there have been three words that I've picked up on as we've gone around this conversation: privacy, security, and trust. They've come up on multiple answers from the other speakers. It's clearly something we're all wary about, particularly as we each generate and create more and more data in our lives as well. What do we need to do to build better trust in the system, to build better safeguards, and to protect principally the most vulnerable in the ecosystem?
I think firstly, we need to stop using the word capture, because as Animesh said, a lot of the data collection that I've seen in many projects, particularly at scale, is quite extractive. And the people doing the capturing have specific objectives and information that they want to learn, which they feel can be used for beneficial purposes. But the interests of the person who actually owns the data, which is the beneficiary, the citizen, we each own our own data. So the question really is, what's in it for me? And why should I give you my data? And I think that's the question that we really need to address. And data protection legislation in India at the moment doesn't offer the kind of protections that GDPR does in Europe, but there's a bill pending. It has been pending for, I think, about 3 years now, a personal data privacy bill in India. And if that is passed, we will all need to take that question much more seriously, as in, why should I give you my data? And I think in order for us to answer that question, we actually need to make a significant investment of time and money in helping the people we aim to serve understand what data means, what is consent, what is privacy. Because if you can't read and write and you've never heard of the internet and you don't understand the word data other than sort of recharge on somebody else's phone, taking informed consent is a bit of a joke. And the amount of effort and money that it's going to take to genuinely take informed consent shouldn't be underestimated. And so I think we have a big job to really figure out how this kind of education can be done effectively. And one of the ideas that has been under discussion is whether we should have the equivalent of a sort of data ombudsman. In other words, people in the community who understand data rights and data protection and data privacy legislation, who can represent the community and protect their interests. Sorry.
Sarah, are you still with us?
Citizens in the community.
All right.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Animesh, if I could bring you in as well. I mean, clearly we've seen in the last 4 or 5 months a frenzy over some of the new age technologies, Web 3.0, shared ledgers, blockchain applicability, NFTs, and most of that is limited to penguins and expensive art, etc. But there are clearly use cases for protection and utilization of data, and then of course allowing the individual who's generated that particular data set to then monetize or create some value on that over a period of time. How are you viewing it from the private sector investment space, and what are some of the opportunities which are likely to come out in the next 6 to 12 months in this space for us?
I think if you to look at the social entrepreneurship space, if you to see what's the future going to look like for data and technology, the intersection of these two aspects, I think it's largely going to be determined by the kind of value that we get out of data. So what is it that we can do with the data that we get? That is essentially going to determine what kind of new initiatives we see around this. We looked at the amount of research or the amount of data that goes into designing a particular intervention. But if you to see that once a particular intervention has been designed and say it has been tested in a limited geography, before you scale up and you generate evidence and you kind of get the validation that whether it's good or not to be scaled up, essentially the two main levers which are which usually determine the extent to which you would be able to scale. One is technology, and the other is communication. So how effectively you can use the levers of communication, how effectively you can go out to people and talk about your solution and explain it in a very easy manner, lucid manner, and how can you leverage technology in this entire process. And that is where I think data also plays a huge role. And I think it's very critical to see how the social sector, and particularly if you to draw parallels with the social media, how the prominent players, they've been using data to also scale. One major dilemma that I have seen, particularly in the social space, is that how do you maintain the balance between scaling up and at the same time also retaining the local nuances? Like when you're working in a limited geography, there's a certain mindset, the culture is in a certain way, people speak a certain language, they have a certain mindset. So while you get that data and say that this particular solution is tailor-made for this particular geography. But at the same time, after a point of time, the funders would want you to scale up to the entire state or to the entire country or even outside that. So how do you do that? How do you maintain that balance between scaling up, standardizing your solution in a certain manner, but at the same time, also you keep into consideration or acknowledge the local nuances? And I think that is where it's very important to see that how while we retain the local nuances, at the same time, there are also certain universal human emotions. And that is where you see how some of the social media big organizations, how they've kind of used the universal human emotions, particularly around sense of achievement, the extent to which your audience is going to engage with your solution, how much time are they going to spend, and particularly if you were to look at going beyond just the utility that your solution is going to offer, are we also looking at the emotional aspects? Is your solution also addressing the emotional needs of your audience? Is it giving them something to feel good about? Is it giving them some kind of story which they can share with their community, with their people? So I think largely in terms of those universal emotions, which are kind of same across the world, that sense of achievement, that epic meaning that something gives you when you complete something, the sense of ownership, owning something, fear of loss, those kind of universal emotions, can those be triggered by the kind of solutions that you offer, which can go beyond just the mere utility that your solution is offering?
Okay. All right, so as we come towards the end, obviously there's questions coming in, so I'm encouraging people to continue to do so, and I can see the speakers responding. Two very rapid fire type of questions just to bring us to a close. The first is, imagine I brought the new IT Minister of India, he's on the call, she's on the call right now, and we've got her all ears. What is the message that you would like to give her so that we can move this forward? So Aniket, firstly for you.
I think I would only say that incentivize organizations to have shared outcomes and kind of work in terms of collecting data. The ownership should just not be on social entrepreneurs or social enterprises. It should be on the big companies also. They probably collect and have collected data historically, which is far more important if they open up the systems. For example, if you have to work on schemes for Kirana stores, ideally you should go to the big FMCG companies, right? So rather than collecting again data on who's got schemes and who's got not, just as an example. So I think incentivizing collective outcomes and making large organizations as accountable as social enterprises and NGOs in really data protection and all the policies.
Ingrid, what would you say to the incoming IT Minister?
I'm not sure I have anything to say to the IT Minister. The two ministries I'd really like to have a word with are the Finance Ministry and the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation.
Oh, you're lucky. They're joining as well. So we've got them here as well.
To the Finance Minister, I'd like to say, Madam, you have within your power the ability, by simply, opening up some of the data your department is sitting on, you have the power to really unleash a flood of generosity from ordinary Indians across the country. So would you please make that data more accessible? And to the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, could you please just see the nonprofit sector as a sector and stop clubbing us into this amorphous household sector where you currently sweep us under?
And Natasha, to you. Any new ministers you'd like me to bring in, or are you happy with the three we have right now?
No, I think that's always very tricky to get lots more ministers in the room. Actually, I wanted to say exactly what Ingrid has said. And so maybe that, plus one just helps, because I think having data that's usable, shareable, downloadable is a really, really big part of making data and cleaning it up also to a large extent. So.
Okay, I will end as I started. We live in a world dominated by social media, very aptly so, I suppose, given how we're conversing today. So for each of the panelists, I'm going to ask you for one hashtag that you'd like the organizers to tweet to encapsulate the message that you brought to this conversation today. And remember, it's a hashtag, right? It's not a long sentence, just one hashtag. Animesh, your hashtag.
Data is power.
Data is power. Very good. Sarah.
Tackle gender biases.
Okay. Aniket.
Democratize data.
Okay, fabulous. Natasha?
Data dosti.
Thursday, all right. And Ingrid?
Transparency, transparency, transparency.
Fabulous, fabulous. Thank you, speakers, for being here. Thank you so much for putting up with my questions and for bringing all that great energy into the conversation as well. Thank you very much to our supporters, the sponsors, the organizers, and mostly, of course, to you, the audience, for being so engaging, having all those questions come in. Of course, you can reach out to any of the speakers, I'm sure, online on their social handles and reach out to them via that. And I'm going to hand back to Divya. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marcus, and to all of the speakers for such a fantastic conversation. We were taking down some notes, which we'd love to come back and share with you as well, but we really, really enjoyed it. It's been very inspiring listening to your experiences and insights. We wanted to highlight some of these key takeaways from the conversations through the artwork that Ghana has been doing. So we can just pull that up as well, so we can all just take a look at it. And while we pull that up, I did want to share a little bit on our next section, which is on the D4GX challenge. The D4GX challenge was launched earlier this year to highlight and create a network of change makers that are using data solutions to create impact in their communities. We had 3 categories of urban resilience, learnings to livelihoods, and health. We had a great response with over 135 applications for the challenge and a lot of interest from social entrepreneurs and various other stakeholders to engage with us. After a 3-stage process, 21 finalists were selected across the 3 categories. It's been inspiring to see the work that has been done on the ground to truly empower end users with data. Today, we have a few members of our selection committee and the steering committee joining us to announce the D4GX 2021 shortlisted cohort and 3 grant winners. I want to invite Ramya Kancharla from Bloomberg to announce the 10 shortlisted organizations and also the winner for one of the categories.
Thank you, Divya. It's my pleasure to introduce the shortlist for the D4GX challenge today. So the shortlist cohort for the Data for Good Exchange challenge is the Red Dot Foundation, Praxis Institute for Participatory Practices, Uninhibited, Digital Green Trust India, Avanti Fellows, Srijan Foundation, Umeed Child Development Center, Center for Policy Research, Scaling City Institutions for India, Shelter Associates, and Swadhar Finaccess. And the winner of the D4GX Empowerment Grant for 2021 in the Urban Resilience category is the Red Dot Foundation.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Sexual and gender-based violence is a global pandemic impacting 1 in 3 women around the world. Yet, 80% of us do not speak up officially or make an official complaint, and this leads to a data gap due to the underreporting of this violence. Safe City, which I started in December 2012 post the gang rape of Jyoti Singh, is a crowd map. We encourage anonymous reporting of personal incidents of sexual and gender-based violence. These stories are then geotagged, visualized on a map as hotspots. The aim is to make visible all these stories of violence which are normally invisible and underreported. And the stories can be filtered through category, day of week, time of day, and location.
Mainstream family system or a school system. But when you're coming from adversity, you're exposed to violence, you're exposed to malnutrition, you are an 8-year-old taking care of your 3-year-old sibling because both your parents are going to work,
Uncle. Congratulations once again to the Red Dot Foundation. Fantastic work. And I'll hand it over now to Sanjay to announce the winners in the next category.
Thank you so much, Ramya. And the winner of the D4GX Empowerment Grant for 2021 in the Learning to Livelihoods category is Srijan Foundation. Congratulations to Srijan Foundation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
थैंक यू दाता फॉर गुड एक्सपीरियंस वो थैंक यू बोलना चाहूँगी और खुद के लिए भी प्राउड फील कर रही हूँ कि हम लोग इसमें क्वालिफाई कर पाए थैंक यू एंड जोहार
बधाई सभी को
जोहार मेरा नाम पूजा है मैं सृजन फाउंडेशन के साथ काम करती हूँ सृजन फाउंडेशन का एम है क्रिएटिंग ए बेटर वर्ल्ड फॉर वीमेन एंड चिल्ड्रन हम महिला किसानों के साथ काम करते हैं जैसा कि हम सभी जानते हैं कि महिलाओं का सूचना तक पहुंच बहुत कम होता है और बाहरी दुनिया के साथ उनका एक्सपोजर भी काफ़ी कम होता है ऐसी स्थिति में महिलाएं अपने खेतों में फसल उत्पादन तो करती हैं लेकिन उसका हिसाब तरीके से रख नहीं पाती हैं उन्हें मार्केट में उनके फसल का क्या रेट चल रहा है इसकी जानकारी नहीं हो पाती है और इस स्थिति में मिडिलमैन आते हैं और वो इन चीज़ों को तय करते हैं
सृजन फाउंडेशन को हमारी शुभकामनाएं और आशा करते हैं कि आने वाले साल में और भी बहुत कुछ आपसे सीखने को मिलेगा लेट मी हैंड ओवर नाउ टू नीरा
Great, thank you, Sanjay. To the next category, we want to announce the winner of the health group. This winner of the Data for Good Exchange Empowerment Grant for 2021 in the health category, which was super competitive and was very difficult for us to actually choose one, but we had to. And the winner is Umeed Child Development Center. And a big congratulations from all of us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity given to us to present our idea and for the collaboration and learning that we are really looking forward to. Thank you so much.
Disability is not a disease. Children with disabilities may have a health condition which makes them learn or speak differently. But they actually have the ability and in fact the right to participate in all aspects of life and community like all other children. In fact, it is the environmental barriers, like the attitudes people have or physical barriers, that really doesn't allow them to play or have fun or have friends or go to school like all other children. Unfortunately, most organizations and individuals who provide services to children don't have that view of childhood disability. They often think of children with disabilities as having deficits that they need to fix. Umeed is trying to change the way organizations think about children with disability, to think of the outcome as participation and not fixing something that's missing. And this can be done and can be measured. Another way that we want to change the way organizations think is thinking about including the voices of children in the decisions that are made about them. Children have strong views in what they want for themselves and what matters to them. We just need to make sure that their voices are taken into account when we are making decisions for them.
I'll now hand over to you, Urmi.
Thank you, Neera, and our congratulations again to our empowerment grant winners and the 2021 shortlist cohort. Over the next year, along with Bloomberg and our partner Societal Platform and the Stanford Digital Civil Society Lab, we will be working closely with this group on mentorship and the amplification of their work. I also wanted to take this opportunity to call out our other 11 finalists and over 60 spotlighted applications that came in as part of this challenge. Please do visit our website to find out more about all the applicants, and we hope to stay closely engaged with all of them over next year. But I think for us, what has been most important across all these innovations and our work over this past year is the voice of the end user. How do we place these voices at the first mile and at the very center of the data empowerment conversation? I want to thank our shortlist cohort for sharing some very compelling videos of their work and the end users of this data. And we're very pleased to present these voices from the ground. Thank you.
पापा जी मुझे फोन दे दो, मुझे प्लायर से होमवर्क करना है। मेरा नाम अरमान खान है, मैं गांव बालसमंद से राजकीय माध्यमिक विद्यालय में कक्षा 10वीं का छात्र हूँ। जैसा कि आप सभी जानते हैं, इस लॉकडाउन में हमारे जैसे बहुत से बच्चों की पढ़ाई बीच में रुक गई थी, लेकिन हमने प्लायो और लाइव क्लासेस में बहुत सी पढ़ाई की। पहले बहुत से दिनों में टेस्ट होते थे और हमें यह पता नहीं चल पाता था कि आज हमने कितना सीखा है। प्लायो की वीडियो रोज मिलती है, जो क्लास में होमवर्क होता है वही हमें प्लायो की वीडियो मिल जाता है और हम उनका आंसर भी देते हैं। प्लायो की सबसे अच्छी बात तो यह है कि हमें तुरंत ही पता चल जाता है कि आज हमने प्लायो में कितना सीखा और सही है या गलत हमारा आंसर। प्लायो की वीडियो में जितने भी क्वेश्चंस होते हैं उनसे हमारा रिवीजन भी हो जाता है, क्योंकि वह हमारे सिलेबस से रिलेटेड होते हैं और हमारी क्लास में जो होता है वही होता है। इसके लिए इन सब चीजों के लिए मैं अवंती और अवंती वाले सर का धन्यवाद करना चाहता हूँ। धन्यवाद।
అందరికీ నమస్కారం, నా పేరు ఓలక లక్ష్మి, మాది బిల్లమాడ గ్రామం, సీతంపేట మండలం, శ్రీకాకుళం జిల్లా, ఆంధ్రప్రదేశ్. మా గ్రామంలోని పూర్వం నుంచి కూడాను జీడి పంటనే ఆధారంగా జీవిస్తూ ఉన్నాము. మేము జీడి పంటలో పాత పద్ధతులనే పాటిస్తూ పంటలు పండించాము. మా దగ్గర జీడి పంట సాగుకు సంబంధించిన అధునాతన పద్ధతులపై సమాచారం లేని సమయంలో డిజిటల్ గ్రీన్ వారి ఫార్మ్ స్టాక్ ప్రాజెక్టు నుండి సమాచారం అందినది.
Restriction of movement due to COVID, we were able to collect evidence-based real-time information that has helped us to measure the reach of various schemes and marginalized communities. Collect aims to promote collectivization of communities and to enable strategic action points for building advocacy and implementing changes in the local governance. It has also served as a medium for transferring information to communities on the presence of several schemes and measures that they were unaware of earlier.
Hi, I am Ayush V, and I would like to say how SafeCity app has helped me. Like, before knowing how to use the SafeCity app, I really didn't know how to reach out to the police stations, nearby hospitals, and get the legal information on how to file an FIR kind of things. And I also didn't have a good understanding of how to tackle situations and report the situations to the police on the spot. And now by using the SafeCity app, it helped me connect to different people, different resources, volunteers, safe circles, and locate the hotspots and prepare me being alert while going through these safer locations. And this helped me in self-empowerment as well as made me stand up for myself. Thank you so much.
This pizza delivery is being made right up to a doorstep. And it's thanks to this unique number, a Google Plus code based on the latitudinal and longitudinal location of a place. It's a blessing for Bhagyashri Kalyankar. She runs an electronics store next door and often needs to order supplies online. She now uses a Plus code as an address on Google Maps and says the material is delivered right to her home.
हा जो कोड आहे तो कोड तिथे नागरिकांना इतका उपयोगाचा आहे तो त्या ठिकाणी पाणी बिल असेल, लाईट बिल असेल, घरफाळा असेल, आरोग्याच्या दृष्टीने असेल, कचरा उठावाच्या प्रश्न असतील, म्हणजे जे जे नागरिकांना ज्या ज्या सुविधा पाहिजे आहे त्या संपूर्ण सुविधेसाठी सदरचा हा सर्वे अत्यंत उपयोगी पडणार आहे.
हमारे एरिया में स्वागत की मैडम आई थी। उन्होंने हमको बचत की और सरकारी योजना की जानकारी दी थी। हमें सुकन्या योजना, 5 रुपए की जादू और बीमा योजना के बारे में जानकारी दी थी। उसमें से हमें सुकन्या योजना का लाभ ले लिया। इसके साथ उन्होंने हमें सौदा साथी का ऐप भी दे दिया। इसी ऐप में मैं दिन भर का खर्चा लिखती हूँ। इससे मुझे मालूम पड़ता है कि महीने भर का कितना खर्चा हुआ। और इसी के साथ मुझे इस ऐप में सरकारी योजना की जानकारी भी मिलती है। जो सरकार की नई नई योजनाएं आती है, इसके हमें तुरंत जानकारी मिलनी चाहिए। स्वागत की ट्रेनिंग की वजह से मुझे एक बचत करने की आदत पड़ गई। इसकी वजह से मैंने बचत करना सीखा।
एक चीज जो मेजर चीजें थी, जैसे बच्चों के साथ खेलता नहीं था, तो उसके बारे में बहुत डीप डिस्कशन हुआ मैम जसविंदर मैम के साथ, और उन्होंने बहुत ही मतलब इफेक्टिव वेज भी बताए, और थोड़ा सा मैंने भी अपनी तरफ से उसमें ऐड किया। आज की कंडीशन ये है कि वो बच्चों के साथ खेलता है, डांस करता है।
In your life, what is important for you? Even if small things like makeup or writing or drawing, even small things, even they mattered a lot. So we both came together and worked on it, set a goal that okay, you have to put kajal in 1 month, you have to put
We hope that this video provided a glimpse into the outstanding efforts being made on the ground by our D4GX 2021 shortlist cohort. I would now like to invite Sanjay Purohit from Societal Platform to share some closing remarks for the session for us.
Thank you so much, Divya. And the last 10 minutes were so energizing to listen to the stories from the ground, truly in the spirit of data empowerment. I hope one of the most trending hashtags in the times to come would be #data empowerment. And that would be interesting to follow. D4GX started as an amazing journey. I'm so grateful to the co-creation that got triggered between Bloomberg, Dasra, the Stanford PACS discussions, and as well as Societal Platform team, but more importantly, all the social entrepreneurs, all the experts, all the innovators who joined hands. And I think that's a big thing. It started with a narrative, right, to unpack ownership of data. So we had some interesting discussions around who owns the data, individual, institution, what does it mean to distinguish between empowerment, capture, all these terms that have been coming up in the discussions today. We also had very enriching discussions around, do we have the capacity to leverage the data? Individuals and institutions, you might have the data, but do you know how to actually leverage it to create the good, if you will? And of course, the most interesting conversation was the agency to act on that data, right? So you may have the ownership and the capacity, but you may not have the agency to act on it. And so this ownership capacity agency started becoming the ground on which we started working together ever since this entire process began. And with two lenses, the view of the institutions and view of the people. What does it mean? And I think over time, we got into this discussion around the first mile, the people for whom we are doing all of this. What is then the last 10 minutes, of course, was an interesting perspective from the first mile, the people for whom we are all striving to make a difference. Then, of course, we wanted to ground this. So the data for good exchange then moved to become the data for empowerment challenge, right? So that was a D4GX to D4EC movement, right? Which was interesting because then we made invitations to the entrepreneurs, to all the innovators to engage, to make this real. Make the theory, make the concepts, bring it to the ground and give us a view from what are they doing. And I think that was an interesting exercise to visualize this entire data empowerment theory or concept in practical terms. What are the challenges? And the run-up has been a testimony to the passion, to the excitement, and the thoughtful work that has been done by the social innovators. Today was a successful milestone in the Data for Empowerment Challenge. I don't believe that this was an end in any which ways. It was actually a beginning of many more things that we need to do to address the data empowerment challenge ahead rather than behind us. Where next? So I think now the beauty is that we have a cohort. We have a cohort of people who are engaged in this discussion, who are practically seeking application, who are exchanging ideas, trying new things. And I think that is very important for any evolution to happen. So ideas, mentorship, action, impact. I think that's the whole journey ahead as 2022 unfolds. Hopefully all of us would be able to leave the entire challenges of the pandemic behind us and actually start focusing on how do we work with these shortlisted organizations that you saw today. How do we mentor them? How do we develop their strength, their energy, their confidence to actually focus deeper and deeper into data empowerment as a fundamental narrative? We will see how do we go ahead in this year to progress, because 2021, the journey that we have behind us, actually highlighted how much we don't know, rather than telling us how much we know. And I think that's a gift in many ways, because our understanding and our ability to appreciate data empowerment got challenged, because we understand data control, we understand how to pursue data commons, but we don't really understand what is the meaning of data empowerment. And we came to know that in the hands of the social entrepreneurs. The more we unpacked the data world through the eyes of the first mile, the more we realized our limitations, right? We could not solve, we could not see, because there were so many things. And I think the discussion today in the panel came around granularity of the data, the kind of resolution that we're working with to be able to really take some good action. And I think those things became very apparent. So 2022 will probably see us curate more conversations around the key themes that we are synthesizing based on the entire 2021 journey, because we identified many things that we need to work on. And of course, lastly, there's a lot to be done to take actions that address the gaps at the platform and resource level. And in this journey, we had discussions around how do funders look at the data empowerment narrative? How does the government look at the data empowerment narrative? If you look at the video, the last 10 minutes video, there were people talking about how do I use data to help myself? And I think that is the perspective that needs to evolve even more and more, which we call as the first mile ownership, capacity, and agency. 2022 has the potential to be an year of solutioning and piloting. So we are hoping that with these social entrepreneurs, we would get to do a lot more solutioning and piloting of innovations, of new ways of looking at data. And that brings to life our shared vision of data empowerment. I would like to end by expressing my gratitude to all on the call and outside for coming together on this journey. It is a very interesting beginning of a very important and a long journey. Special thanks to Vanna and Neera, of course, for extending the privilege to co-create this movement together. And I look forward to the year ahead being the year of #data empowerment. Take care, stay safe. Back to Divya.
Thank you so much for that, Sanjay. And thank you so much to everyone for joining us this afternoon. Before we end, we want to showcase some of the key insights that we've gathered through our conversations today, represented by Ghana's beautiful artwork. We also really appreciate you joining us, and please do reach out to us if you'd like to engage with D4GX in the coming year or months. We have shared our contact information in the chat. Please do send it to us here as well, and have a really wonderful rest of the week. You can close the link now.